The boogeyman is coming.
Hi, everybody. This is Joseph Oakley of Stokely Films. I'm the co-writer, the director, and the creator of the new slasher sensation Specimen 6, which will be coming out very soon to you guys next month. I wish it was sooner, but editing's taken a little while. That being said, hi, welcome. I am the very handsome, very debonair Joseph Vogley. As you can see, you like this. Sometimes I wear a these, but tonight I'm not. And I'm joined here tonight by my very lovely, my very delightfully titular, and I'm not just talking about in the title of sorts because her name is in the title. I'm talking about the other good stuff. Mariana, could you please introduce yourself and tell people what is this podcast?
Hello, everybody. I'm Mariana, and this is the No Country for Joe and Mariana podcast. And
Yay!
today we have a special guest, Chris. Thank you for joining us.
Yes,
I'll be playing random white guy number 3.
Random white guy number 3. This is the Southern Fried Belle of the Ball, Christopher Steele, who will be joining us for our topic of ghost stories. But first, we are going to be reviewing a few things that we've seen and we've done, etc., etc., etc. Mariana, please tell us what is new with you.
I've been playing this game called Foul Play. And it's a side scroller, button mashing, kick butt kind of game. But the premise of it is so super cool. So it's a side scroller, but you're on a stage in a theater, and you're recounting the story of Dashforth, who is a demonologist, and he's just trying to find out what's happened to his father. And there's multiple plays that you have to finish, and each play has 5 acts, and you have a couple of things that a couple of goals that you have to hit in those 5 acts, but it's super fun. It's really funny and witty, and I really enjoy it.
What can you find that on right now?
Sorry, what?
What can you play it on? There's
I play it on the PS4. Sorry,
Oh.
I live next to Payne Field, and there's a plane that is currently just going over my apartment. I can't hear anything. Just give it like 2 seconds to leave. And there it is. Okay, now I can hear you.
Okay, so it's on the PS4 and it's on Steam and other
I believe
things?
it's on Steam as well.
Okay.
I've been playing it on the PS4. I enjoy the controller.
I like side scrollers. I'm a big fan of Mario. I'm a big fan of Contra, Castlevania, things like that. So it's kind of refreshing to get that platform nowadays where most things these days are just kind of over the shoulder or third player, as it were. So, for us throwbacks, us old men over here, we enjoy something that makes us remember our childhood, as it were. Yeah. So, the good old 80s, the Max Headroom.
Back in my day.
Back in my day. Yeah, the crystal clear Pepsis, all the good stuff that we recall back in the day. Christopher Steele, our very special guest. Oh, he is so good looking down there in that little box there. Could you tell us, what have you been up to? Have you watched anything good recently? Movies, video games, etc.?
So as far as video games go, I'm playing Valorant right now, which is a new shooter by Riot Games. It's, if you've ever heard of like Counter-Strike, it's very similar. As far as movies, The Vast of Night. If you guys haven't seen that, I would very much suggest it. It's very like what is that guy's name? The guy that directed it is Andrew Patterson. Andrew Patterson, that's right. And I think that's the only thing he's ever directed, which is surprising because it's really good. It's very like Spielberg-esque. Like think of like God, what was the name of that movie? I always forget the name of that alien movie, Spielberg. Close Encounters. Yeah, Close Encounters. Like there's a lot of build up and the payoff isn't until the end, and it's a micro budget film, so the payoff is like you get to see like a UFO or whatever, but it's totally worth it. The cinematography, the acting is phenomenal, the dialogue is awesome. Yeah, it's just really good. There's a lot of suspense that builds up through the movie. It's very, very suspenseful.
All right, well, that sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, it's definitely really good.
What is that on?
I watched it on Amazon. I think it's an Amazon original.
Oh, it's Amazon original. So yeah, everybody.
So Prime.
Okay, if you got Amazon Prime, you can go check it out on that. I'm looking forward to watching that. I think Chris might have told me about that before as we worked together, and it looks. I think it sounded really interesting.
It's really good. If you watch it just for the cinematography alone, that's worth it. Just the way it's shot.
So if you're
really
a film
good.
buff, then that would be really cool. I wanted to talk about something. So I was hanging out today with my wife. We were just gonna watch an old VHSs. I've got probably 600 VHSs, probably 1,000 DVDs, and we wanted to hang out in bed and watch some VHSs. So I dug out some, and I have a handful in there that I haven't seen yet. And I watched one today, and I'm a huge history buff. I went to college. I'm a history major. Mariana Chipoletta.
Joseph Vogley. I also got my history major.
Yep.
That's how we met.
That's how we met. So Mariana is a history major as well. We both have our bachelors in history. She's far smarter than I am, but we were in the same class together. And so, which class was that again? It was
that was medieval France, I think.
Medieval France, medieval Europe sort of class. And I remember I was sitting there in the front row. I would often sit in the front row as people. I just try to get the most out of the money that I paid for in class, unless it was like a really shitty class, and then I'd sit in the back and I'd be like, ain't worth my time. But I was sitting in front of the class. I was really intrigued. I was like, okay, I want to learn about, medieval Europe and everything like that. I've always thought it was fascinating. And then all of a sudden, this gal in a cape and a hood walks by. Not to mention, she had great cleavage as she was walking by. That was Mariana. She shows it off. If you got it, flaunt it, folks. That's what Mariana always says. If you got it, flaunt it. So she walks by. I'm like, hey, who's that? And she goes and sits down. And I think a few days later, we ended up like comparing notes on something or other. And she ended up being just like this really cool gal that was super nerdy like I was. And then we just started hanging out. We're just good friends. It's been awesome ever since. So history, that's why. I don't even know what I'm talking about anymore. And then I ended up like watching this movie right here called The Day Lincoln Was Shot. And I watched it because I'm a big history fan, but I'm also a big Lance Henriksen fan. And Lance Henriksen, as we all know, if you're a horror fan, is the star of Pumpkinhead, among many, many, many other great horror films. I would have to say it also has Rob Morrow from Northern Exposure fame. It is a very well acted film. Everybody in the movie does an incredible job. Nobody's trying to overact anybody. Nobody's chewing on scenery. Lance Henriksen plays a wonderful Abe Lincoln. Rob Morrow plays John Wilkes Booth. And it is a very fascinating. I've never seen a film that really tries to dig into John Wilkes Booth as this one does. It really tries to get into his psychology and everything like that. So that is why I'm bringing this up. I sat around and I watched this, but then it kind of like sprung some thoughts in my brains about some ghosts and stuff like that. And so the day Lincoln got shot kind of started making me think about really cool old stories. So I grew up like reading books about ghosts, but one of the most famous ghosts in American history is Abraham Lincoln himself. And Abraham Lincoln, actually shortly after he died, he was shot in the back of the noggin. People started seeing on an annual basis the train that carried his body. It was a ghost train. They would see it year after year. This ghost train would go by, and they would say they would look into the conductor's area, and they would see this conductor that was a skeleton as it was going by, and they would see the back of where Lincoln's coffin was there and everything like that. Other moments was up until very recently, people that stayed in Lincoln's bedroom would wake up in the middle of the night. They would look over and they would say that they could see Lincoln sitting there putting his boots on or taking his boots off. And he's had many ghostly appearances over the years in the White House. And so I thought that was always fascinating. And so bringing that up, we're going to be talking about a lot about ghostly things that we know about, stories of that sort, kind of personal ghost stories as well. I'm going to stop talking so much as fast as I usually do, just so we can kind of really enjoy this, because this is kind of fireside, folks. We're sitting by the fire, we're telling good old ghost stories, and we really hope you enjoy. Mariana!
Before we move on to the ghost stories, I have a question, though.
Did I miss something? What's going on?
No, you didn't miss anything. It just, like, when you were telling us about the appearances, the apparitions of Lincoln, why do you think it would be the act of putting on or taking off his boots?
Well, I think, and this has been covered, is so Lincoln wasn't one for really going to bed for long periods of time or anything, so it wasn't like he hung out in his bedroom a lot. When he was in the White House, he was putting in his long hours. It was during the Civil War, every single day, pretty much up until his death of being shot at Ford's Theater, was being in the war room and trying to win the war for the Union. And so he would get, after a long day, finally get there. That would be his big emotional thing, I think, where he could let go of everything and he could relax and he'd take off his boots. I think it's more allegorical than anything that of Lincoln, because he was known such as a melancholic sort of individual, that when someone recollected a story about Lincoln, they would think about him in a somber way. He was a great storyteller. He was a peaceful individual. So when you saw him, he was never like propelled doing something. He was always in this state of relaxation because he made other people relaxed as well, except for John Wilkes Booth, of course. And I think it's just like one of those things where you want to see Lincoln in a state of eloquence, and a pioneer man such as himself taking off his boots at the end of the day, it kind of signatures a different state of mind, a different time past of when a man puts in his hours in the day and he's relaxing. But you also see him as a well-learned individual. And I don't know if the ghostly aspect of the story is so much true as it is just an American's feelings and hearts towards the great emancipator himself. And so if you are in the Abraham Lincoln's bedroom and you see him in such a state of almost repose, like at this kind of a delicate moment because he's letting off his guard, you think, now there's a man who has sacrificed himself for America, and now it's time for him to sleep. And maybe that's why we see him in that way, or people have seen him in that way. There was someone that asked one of the individuals that was sitting next to, Todd Lincoln perhaps, was sitting next to one of the soldiers that had been tending to Lincoln after he had been shot, and he had been sitting there all night long with Lincoln. He had tried to help him get better, even though everybody knew he was dying. And Todd came in and he says, "Did you know my father?" And he says, "No, I didn't, but I loved him very much." And Lincoln kind of inspires that Americana in us, as it were. Did we know Lincoln? No, we didn't. Nobody ever really knows Lincoln except for those very close to him. But do we love the great emancipator? Do we love the person that embodies the Union? Yes, we do, very much. And maybe that's what we see is our love is that ghost. Mariana.
It was quite the interpretation there.
Yeah, that's all great and everything, but why hasn't Pumpkinhead been rebooted yet?
That's a good question. There's been several sequels. There's been 2, 3, and 4. Part 2, Blood Wings, I really liked. Part 2, 3, and 4 actually have Lance Henriksen. He was good in them, not great movies. I highly recommend seeing them nonetheless. Mariana Chipoletta.
Yes, Joseph Fogley.
Tell us your little ghostly experience or thoughts or anything like that.
Yeah. One of my favorite stories, and it's very much linked to something that did happen to me at one point, is La Llorona. I know there was actually, I think, a recent movie called that. There's so many variations of the story. But the basic root of the story that is kind of in all of those stories is that she's this, La Llorona means, llorar means to cry. So she's the wailing woman. And the legend is that she's kind of like a banshee-like yell, right?
Yeah.
That she does at night, and she's usually found like around lakes and things like that, and she's crying for her lost children, for her murdered children that she murdered. And the first time I heard this story, I was down in Mexico, and I was just hanging out with some people, and they were telling me about this because there's a road that we were going down where they said that a lot of car crashes happened because people would see La Llorona coming down from the well at the top of the hill that was there. And she would come down into traffic, and the cars would go off-road because they didn't want to hit the person, not realizing really that she was just an apparition. And I, it was just kind of like one of those nights where I was like, okay, sure, like, sure that happens, right? And then I remember we were coming back on that same road a few hours later, and I heard this like blood-curdling scream. And then there was like the sound of a car crash, and about half a mile in front of us, a car had crashed. And it was crazy.
Whoa.
But it was cool. It was fun.
That story was much better than the movie.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear the new movie wasn't very good.
I haven't seen the movie.
Yeah.
Was it bad?
Don't watch it. It's not worth it.
Oh.
So my dear sweet child, Christopher Steele. Oh, my delicate blue-eyed angel.
You guys are doing the same beard like stroke thing right now.
That's how we excite each other.
We excite you. Christopher Steele here. He is from the South, and we all know that the South has some of the great Gothic Southern ghost stories. It's a very old place. There's a lot of old spirits there. And Chris has told me several times some good old ghost stories from down there. Chris, could you tell us, kind of set the stage about your past with the supernatural and everything of that sort?
As far as supernatural, I want to say that I haven't had any experiences. I'm open to it. I want to. But I think that most of the things I've probably have experienced can be like reasoned away reasonably. There are, however, a lot of stories surrounding my grandmother's house. I wouldn't say I don't think I've ever experienced anything there, but what I will say is when you're in the house, it's very thick. It feels very unwelcoming. Like I don't like to stay there. I don't like to be in there during the day by myself. It's that kind of like unwelcoming, creepy vibe. Back to kind of set that up, I guess, whenever they first bought the house, they kind of built onto it over the years. They were out gardening, and like any other stereotypical like ghost story, they were digging a garden and like some gravestones popped up. They like dug up some like gravestone toppers, like stone angels and things like that. And so they think that part of the land that they acquired there might have been a cemetery before they acquired it, and it might have just been like buried over. So needless to say, there was a lot of stuff when my mom and my aunt were growing up that happened to them. They think it's haunted. My grandma thinks it's haunted for sure. You were saying you wanted the story about the
Yeah, actually, well, there's so many stories you told me about that house in particular, but I thought since we're here on a short period of time, maybe kind of tell us about when your grandmother was.
Okay. So my grandparents used to pass papers at night. So my grandpa would go to pick up the papers around midnight. The town
Newspaper.
over, yeah, newspapers. He would go to pick up the papers. My grandma would wait at the house for him to call her and be like, "Okay, I got the papers. Come out." And then she'd go out, pick up her half, and they'd deliver, and then meet back at the house. My grandma was waiting at the house one night, and she is just playing cards or whatever, playing like solitaire by herself at the kitchen table, and she hears like a thump come from the back of the house. She like doesn't think anything of it, keeps playing. uh Here's another thump, and so the way she's sitting at her kitchen table, like the bathroom door is like directly in front of her, and it's open. It's always open when there's nobody in there, just like anybody else's bathroom, I suppose. um she heard another thump, and she just said, to quote her, she said, "If there's anything in here, let yourself be known." And when she said that, the bathroom door slammed. And she said that's the only time she's ever felt threatened by any sort of like spiritual thing in her house. So she just got up and left. But that was, yeah, that's a pretty short one. That's the only, she said that was the only time that it really bothered her. But I think there's been one other time that bothered her, but that was a different sort of situation altogether.
Well, tell us about the other one. What's going on there?
She was laying in bed one night. Something kept waking her up, and she'd wake up with the blankets off of her feet. She would. This could probably be explained away by like night terrors or something like that, by like sleep paralysis. So she's laying in bed. She wakes up a couple times, blanket off her feet. Wakes up, gets pissed off, like throws the blankets back down on her feet. And then while she's awake, something throws the blankets off of her feet. And she said she felt something grab her feet. And when it grabbed her feet, she couldn't move. And it was like she was locked to the bed. And she was pretty scared that time. So,
yeah. I mean, well, you can try to explain away a lot of things, I think. And you might be very successful in such ways, but sometimes things are just things, you know. But I remember one time, it was the one time that this happened to me, that sleep paralysis. My wife Liz and I, this is before we were married. I was living down in Olympia. She was living up here in northern Whatcom County area, and we decided to meet up down in Vancouver, Washington. And so the first night we had kind of planned it where I would pick a hotel for the first night and she would pick a hotel in Portland for the second night. So I picked one in Vancouver for the first night. It was this lovely old kind of craftsman's sort of house. It was one of those things that you would order at a Sears Roebuck or whatever, and it was a double story, lots of rooms, back what they did in the old day. And each room was different themed, and I picked this very lovely French motif theme. I paid a lot of money. We had some nice fluffy pancakes in the morning, and the next day it was time to go to Portland and find out what hotel she had picked out. In fact, she had not picked out a hotel but a motel, and it was the Palms Motel. It was very much a hooker motel, and if you show up there was somebody had punched a hole in the bathroom door. Things smelled very crackish, if you know what I mean, and it was not exactly romantic, if you will. So sometimes you can. I thought about this after the story, but I'll tell you the story first. So we went out, we had a good night, we went to a couple bars, had some donuts, came back, fell asleep. I woke up in the middle of the night, and I was wide awake, and I was frozen to the bed. I couldn't move, and there was a ghastly woman, what they would call the old hag, if you're paralyzed in your sleep. And kind of hot because there's some boobies and stuff like that going on, but also I was frightened beyond anything.
The story keeps getting better.
I know, and it actually felt like she was trying to have sex with me.
So you're having like a Dan Aykroyd moment.
It was very much a Dan Aykroyd moment, and I'm not joking whatsoever. I joke a lot on the show. I'm not joking. She was on top of me. She was holding me down. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak, and I was shaking all over. And after a couple minutes, or what seemed like forever, Liz grabbed onto me and said, you're just dreaming, everything's okay. And that snapped everything out. I've never had an experience like that before. I've never had an experience like that happen. I've had supernatural experiences before, you know, and since, but that was the one moment I've had a sleep paralysis moment. So, I think there are, you know, moments where these things happen that I could have explained it away where maybe, I don't know, people, maybe I drank too much and that kind of affected me. Maybe there was meth in the wall, as they usually are in motels and whatever in Portland. Maybe that affected me. But at the same time, it was such an intense experience. I still live with it. So whatever the explanation might be, I'm living with this thing that happened to me, and there's nobody at this point that can scientifically point one way or the other.
I feel like I've had. You go ahead and finish there.
I'm just saying, somebody could be like, hey, go back to that room and try to reproduce the thing that happened to me at that night. And if it happens to you, then sure, that's science. But at this moment, nobody can say, like, it was probably this. I was like, you can't say that because you weren't in my shoes at the time. And it felt freaking weird at the time.
Yeah,
if this woman tried to have sex with me.
Thinking about it, I think I've had one sleep paralysis experience, and I think it was here. It was definitely, it was at this house here. I was laying in bed, and I think I just stayed up too late or something, and my brain was set in on a weird wavelength because I'd keep like waking up, and I remember like struggling to try to get out of the bed, and then right about when I'm about to get out of the bed, I'd wake back up laying down and like do it again. And it happened like 30 or 40 times. It was just like over and over and over. And like the more times that it happened, the more I'd start like trying to like see the room or whatever. And at one point I very distinctly remember seeing like a weird shadow peeking around the doorway, like looking at me. And I think that was sort of like a sleep paralysis thing. It was pretty terrifying. But I feel like it was also like an enjoyable experience, if that's, you know, like I wouldn't mind going through that again. It was very unique.
Yeah. That's intriguing. So, I mean, there's this weird like tie between dreams and reality and etc. Mariana Chipolata. Do you have any other particular kind of like supernatural, like bridging on the bounds of reality and this or that? I mean, we're basically on this subject of thing, but
I actually have had a lot of sleep paralysis. I actually suffer from nightmares. I've never found the root of the problem, but I also suffer from false awakenings, and a lot of people do experience those false awakenings where you wake up and you go through the motions of getting ready and stuff, and then you wake up again and you're like, oh crap, like
I've definitely done that before.
Yeah. And that can happen like 2-3 times, and that's usually what happens. Is it happens 2-3 times, but then at other times I'll start kind of picking up on it faster, and so I'll go into these loops, and I've lost count at like 10, 15, sometimes 20 times. And it gets to the point where the wake up isn't so much like waking up and doing like the normal thing anymore. It's me waking up and then checking to see if I'm awake. So I'll go through my house, and you know, usually in dreams, if you go through a threshold, you're in a completely different place. Or if you try to count your fingers, you'll miss a finger or something.
When it happens to you, does it feel like almost like maybe you're underwater with like struggling with movement? You know, does that make sense?
Sometimes it is, and sometimes it feels completely natural. Like I'm totally fine. There is sometimes where I feel fur, and I don't have any pets, so I'll feel like fur or like certain textures. I'll feel them. But as the number kind of goes up, as the count goes up of how many times this is happening, I kind of feel like I'm going slowly and more insane, basically. And so these visions start getting more intense. Things start warping, and you know, creatures start appearing. And then finally what'll happen is I'll wake up, but I'll be paralyzed and like sweating, but I'll know I'm awake, because in none of those dreams, I'm always kind of skeptical of whether or not I'm awake, but I never actually out loud voice, am I awake? And so when I finally feel myself say, am I awake? And doubting myself for being awake or asleep, that's when I know I am awake. But I'm paralyzed. Like I cannot move. And I've actually felt that gripping of the feet before. I like I said, I live alone. I don't have any pets, so there's really not anything here that can touch me. So it could all be psychological. Not good with words today, but yeah, I've also often felt like it's scary, and the combination of those three things is terrifying.
It was definitely very unnerving when it happened to me. But like I said, I would still, maybe I wouldn't want to experience it again if it happened all the time. But that being the only time I've ever really experienced it that I can remember, it was very unique. It was it's another like sort of situation that I want to explore, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like I want to have that sensation again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of it's almost addicting, because I used to actually like be afraid of going to sleep. I'm not afraid of the dark, but I am afraid of going to sleep sometimes. But that only lasts for so long, and then it's almost like Chris said, like I kind of want that to happen again, because next time I want to be able to recognize it sooner, so I can really like pick it apart and analyze it and feel that it's a different kind of fear. It's
like it's like a different state of consciousness, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in one where you feel like you're somewhat in control, but not all the way in control.
I didn't feel in control at all. With my experience, like right when I felt like I was about to get farther, like get out of the bed to where I wanted to be ready to where I could get into fight or flight mode. Like I couldn't even get to fight or flight mode. Like because I was stuck trying to get out of the bed, and then right about when I get out, I'd be popped back down to the bed and then waking up again trying to get up.
Yeah.
So
I definitely struggle with the control. It's like trying to gain control each time that it happens. So
yeah,
I feel like I do it sometimes.
It wasn't like I would get knocked back down. It was like I would be waking up again, like I had never gotten up in the first place.
Like the moment your will comes in,
it's like you're snapped back to the start mode.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was very strange.
So that's our experience, Joe.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I guess we kind of covered some of mine, some of yours, some of Chris's. I've had plenty of other things that have happened to me, but maybe we should definitely revisit this topic at a later date, because I think I have so much to say about the supernatural, and of course I love horror films and everything like that. But I've had some very odd things happen to me over the past. Mariana, do you have any like older? What I'm really fascinated about is like kind of stories from our parents or grandparents, ghost stories of that nature. Chris talked about his grandparents and stuff. Do you have any from your past, anybody? Because you come from the old country, as it were, like you literally do. So do you have any old country kind of ghost stories over that way?
My family was never superstitious, so we don't have any, but I can tell you that my grandfather has a wine cellar, and it is the creepiest place in that entire house.
So if we were sitting around reading ghost stories, as it were, because I have plenty of books that I love to do that with, what wine would you say, hey, you should drink a glass of wine as you listen to these ghost stories?
I think for ghost stories, I would go with a white. And actually, you know what? I would say a rosé. I don't know that I have a particular one that I would drink, but I think a rosé would be a nice ghost story drink.
I like rosé. It's very juicy. You can just drink it. You get kind of lost in it. All right, everybody. Well, this was a great episode. I think we're going to do other episodes where because there's so much more we can experience and tell about the paranormal and ghosts and stuff. I know personally I have a lot more thoughts about it, a lot more feelings, even more Abraham Lincoln stories as it were. But I want to thank the
Wait. Before you close it up, tell the one about that graveyard you went to. And you were walking, and you said it like felt real bad or something. You remember that story?
Yeah, okay.
Tell me that one. I want to hear that one again.
All right, folks. Well, I'll give you one more ghost story. So, crack open another one of your White Claws, spark another blunt, as it were, as Mariana prefers to do. Yeah, buddy boy, that's what I'm talking about. And kick back by the fire. Maybe you got your phone in your hand or something while you're watching this. So my buddy Davey and I, that you've probably seen on one of these other videos or something, but he's in my new movie Specimen 6, which will be out on next DVD next month. We were about 20 years old at the time, 19, 20. You have to kind of preface this whole thing. So back when I was about 16 years old, 15, 16, this thing happened in high school where a bunch of these kids, I lived in a small town up in northwestern Washington, and there's this long hill road that you would walk up to, and there's this very creepy old graveyard up there. Well, it was Halloween night, and I was kind of walking around by myself, and I ran into a friend who I can't say their name, but they said, hey, do you want to go up to this old graveyard with us and hang out? We're going to probably have some drinks and stuff. And I thought, well, I'm cold and I don't have a coat on right now, because back in those days, I thought it was really cool not to wear a coat. I'm 37 years old now. When I was 16, I thought, maybe I'll show off these muscles and a coat will cover up these old guns here. So I didn't wear a coat. I was cold and it was starting to rain out, and I thought, that's not a cool idea. Plus, I'm kind of getting this feeling it's a bad idea just to go up there and hang out with you guys. I ran with kind of a rougher crowd back then for a small town. There was drugs, there was alcohol, things of that nature. So he goes, cool. Yeah. He goes up there, and the next day at school, I was friends with, I had a crush on with one of these gals that went up there, and she was a troublemaker of sorts. And no, it was 4 days later. I found out what happened the day after. 4 days later, I see this girlfriend I had a crush on. We had dated for like a week at one point, still had a crush on. She was being walked out by a cop, and she was in handcuffs. And I'm like, what the heck is going on here? Well, apparently I knew what had happened, but these teenagers up there, they went there, they had done a lot of drugs, drank a lot of alcohol, beverages, things of that nature, way too many drugs. They had painted stuff on the walls of this small little mausoleum. They had unfortunately desecrated a body that was there. It was very disturbing, very disgusting. They had upset something there. They were loose friends, as it were. So all of them ended up being arrested because somebody had told on them, yada, yada. They went through their experiences. They got out, whatever. One gal was so hopped up on whatever drug she was on that she was committed to a mental asylum for a time. So a couple years later, my buddy Dave and I were bored. It was we didn't have any beer that night, and it was 2 a.m, 1 a.m, 2 a.m, and we decided to drive to this graveyard just to go for a walk, because that's what we did. And Dave and I, we don't really talk when we're hanging out and yada yada, but we go up to this graveyard, and it's mostly dark in there except for a couple lights, and we're walking down this path. And as we're walking along, we're just kind of smoking our cigarettes and walking and walking and walking. And we get to this point where there's this large tree overhang, and there's all these shadows and darkness. We get up to this point, we haven't been talking, but we both stop dead in our tracks. We turn about face, and we walk back out. We get out of this graveyard. I look at him. He looks at me. He says, "Did you just feel what I felt?" We had this feeling of this force that didn't want us there. It told us to get the fuck out. If we had walked any further, something bad would have happened. I don't know if any of this is like there, but it's strange that both Davey and I would have had this feeling at the same time, because this isn't something that we think about or whichever, you know. We would have just kept walking, doing what we were doing. And we walked out, and it was the most non-present present force that I've ever felt that kicked me out of somewhere. And this happened again maybe 10, 15 years later, back into that quite a bit later, at another point when we were somewhere else where we technically should not have been, that was probably haunted. And so it was very disturbing. I don't know how you can explain away having such a strong emotion as that, but when you get hit by an emotion, when you're emotionless at the time, how do you explain that? That's kind of what rounds about the supernatural experience, I guess. Like, how do you do that? You're walking along, you're simply existing in a state, you're peaceful, and then all of a sudden you feel like you're gut punched. Now, I knew I had this feeling, I knew I had this knowledge about what had happened there, so maybe that affected me somehow. Maybe that affected Dave. I don't know. But going into that cemetery, that graveyard, at any point in my adult life, I've had that feeling like something bad happened here, and I know something bad happened there. Like an old body had been pulled out of its tomb. It had been messed with. Things had been spray painted. Bad drugs had happened. Very serious, nasty stuff had happened there. And somehow, when I showed up a couple of years later, I felt the brunt of that. I never wanted to mess with that. Like when some thing said, "Don't be here. This isn't for you." I took that to heart and I got the fuck out. So
I like that story.
It's a good one. So, well, it's the truth. It's one. I have many other true ones. I try not to overblow stories. I take things of the supernatural seriously. I love horror movies. I love things of that nature. But when it comes down to things of such as like that, I respect them, because you got to respect your own emotions, if anything. You know, you got to know what's going on, and I think it's kept me out of kind of some bad situations over the years. You get that gut feeling, you get the fuck out. So
You would do well in a horror movie scenario.
I would. I'd be like, going down to that basement's a bad idea.
Yeah, let's just leave and go eat White Claws.
Right? Yeah. Well, now I'm going to go home and drink White Claws. I don't know what you guys are doing. Yeah. All right, everybody. Well, this was a lot of fun. Christopher Steele, you sweet, darling Southern belle of the ball. My very delightful, delectable, lovely, so many other words of sorts. Mariana Cipolletta, my Italian, very good friend. We thank you for joining us with these ghost stories. I think we're going to come back with a lot more ghost stories.
Absolutely.
Do you think you have other ghost stories?
I think that I know of some ghost stories.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed these ghost stories, and I hope that it's chilled you down and that you're ready for a good night's sleep. So we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for joining us again on the podcast. What is this podcast, Mariana?
Thank you for joining us. This is No Country for Joe and Mariana.
And thank you, Chris, for joining us. This was a great time. We'll talk to everybody soon. Chris will be back for another episode when we're telling ghost stories.
Don't make any promises. We'll see.
Oh, I'm making promises because I know he's got some really good ghost stories. All right. We'll talk to you later, folks. And you take care of yourselves. Bye. Stay scared.